Now, if you were asked to explain your life's work in 8 minutes, could you do it? Well, that was Tom's challenge when he was invited down to Groundswell this year to participate at Speaker's Corner as part of a fast-paced session looking at novel crops and how they fit into the future of farming. But the real question wasn't could Tom fill 8 minutes, but would 8 minutes be enough?
Thank you all for coming along. It's a great audience. My novel crop is watercress. I've been growing watercress for 30 years. You tend to get into the industry by being born into it, being married into it, or falling into it accidentally. And I was the latter. I didn't know what watercress was. And before my interview 30 years ago, I phoned up the Watercress Association. I spent 2 hours on the phone that evening talking to him. Next day, went to the meeting and said, "Hi, I'm Tom Amery." He said, "Yes, we met last night." And so it's a small industry, and you'll be surprised it's not just the two of us. There are more. We've got another watercress grower at the back over there. George, put your hand up. That's George Matthews. He's 21 and he's joined the industry 3 years ago. So he completed his A-levels and then went straight into the watercress industry, and he was trained in Hampshire. Now we are farming around about 20 hectares in the UK, and that's split in Hampshire, Cranbourne, and also Dorset. And they're all in those locations because the novel part of our production is we use water. It's a hydroponic system. And these farms have been operated for probably best part of around about 140 years. And that's the commercial element of it. But we believe it was brought as a novel crop by the Romans, obviously when they arrived, but it's been picked up and grown intensively in the last, say, 140 years. The idea of producing the crop requires staff, and my job is to help the staff. They have to learn. We need people that are going to be here for their entire lives. So the farming matrix of producers ranges from George being 21 right up to being 65, 68 years old. And that skills base is effectively a heritage skill for us, because what we're doing is we're teaching people how to manipulate water to grow a crop. And we are growing in these locations which all they do is grow watercress. They're not good for anything else. Effectively, there were riverbeds that have been widened and filled with gravel, organized with concrete walls, or they used to be shutters of timber. And then we have carrier systems, and we transfer the water around the farm. We have to be able to put in tiny amounts of water, i.e. 1 or 2 millimeters, right up to probably 20 or 30 centimeters, depending at the time of the production. So we're a mono production, which means that all we've ever done is grow watercress in these locations for 140 years, and there was never a time when there isn't a crop in the bed. We're extremely productive as a horticultural business because we are producing a crop from January right the way through to December. Our core season in the UK starts in May, maybe the end of April, and it finishes at the end of October, beginning of November. But one of the novel changes that we've had to make over the last few years is to find ways that we can manipulate the crop to grow during the winter, or find ways of producing opportunities to sell crop that we haven't previously sold. So in the last 30 years, I've spent all of that time growing crop for a single market, which is the supermarkets. So before the supermarkets, it would have been bunches and greengrocers. But once the greengrocers started fading out, the supermarkets took over, and we produce between 30 and 40 tons a week of watercress right the way through the year. So that production process requires us to visualize our entire matrix of watercress beds and literally treat them like a game of Tetris. And we've got to basically create a year-long flight path so that that flight path is planned 12 months in advance, and we're drilling or planting beds on very specific days in order to count through to get to the date we need it. So our business is built on accuracy and solid outcomes, and that requires members of staff to really understand how watercress grows and what can affect it. So all of the things that are associated, like weather and insects and that side of things, are all built into the plan, so we know but roughly where we're going to be at any point in the year, because we're talking about extreme experience of situations that can occur in the bed. Our core input into growing watercress is the water. So we're using 50 million litres a day of spring water that's been locked under the ground. So that water has been locked under there and working its way back up again over about a 60-year period, and it's loaded with nitrates and phosphates. Interestingly, the phosphates and the nitrates were really provided to the water. They were linked up to the water post-war. So we're looking at 1950s, 1960s. So we're living off the nutritional use of that period. And that water flows through the bed. It's a 10-degree constant, and it helps the crop to obviously provide the nutrition, but it keeps it cool during these hot periods. In the winter, it keeps it warm because it's always 10 degrees. So that's our primary input. The second input after that then is going to be the lack of pesticides. The lack of pesticides started around about 20 years ago for us. Prior to that point, when I sort of joined the company, there was a lot of pesticides being used and we basically banned it. It was quite difficult to argue how you could apply a pesticide onto a crop where the water was flowing straight into a river system. So we took the judgment that we'd stop at that point. It took us about 10 years to build an ecosystem in the beds. And now we've got around about 5,000 insects per square meter. So you're talking into the billions across our entire UK production area. And that insect population is split over around about 83 macroinvertebrates. And those macroinvertebrates are what they're doing is generating nutrition by helping the breakdown of the old leaves and also eating other insects. They're eating each other plus eating the old crop. So the watercress looks like this. As you can see at the bottom, it's rooted into the gravel. That white area is rooted into gravel. Then you've got an area where you've got leaves that are starting to go yellow, and that is our source of nutrition. So that's where the insects are obviously breaking that down. There'll be obviously bacteria doing that job as well. And then up at the top where my hand is, so where my little finger is, that's about the lowest point you can harvest the crop. But this crop is not ready for about another 4 or 5 days. So you'll get another 6 inches on the top of this. The bit that we're harvesting is the very top, the top 10 centimeters, and that's being sold across the UK in millions of bags every week. But what we're interested in for our novel use of material is the middle bit. So we started developing pestos for the NHS. And what we're looking to do is create a watercress pesto that can be then used to take away the waste crop that we have and then can be used in a useful way. So the idea is that the middle part, we can go back into the beds, cut it, and then transfer that into pesto manufacturing. And generally, the way that the pesto you eat today in the UK, that's basil that's produced in Italy that's turned into a slurry with salt and oil and then is held in a -5 temperature. And what we've got is we've got these huge lumps of production in the middle of the summer period, and we need to obviously turn that into something that's shelf stable. What we're looking at is these pestos and creating a frozen line, an opportunity.
What is the nutritional benefit of eating watercress?
It's the most nutrient dense crop in the world. So under something called the aggregate nutrient density index, it strikes as 100%. So basically for calories, it's the best. And then also you've got phytochemicals, and those phytochemicals are called isothiocyanates, and they're particularly strong in watercress, and it's great for phase 2 detox of your liver. It also does DNA protection, stops DNA damage.
Could you combine watercress beds with natural flood management? Secondly, is it hard to get permission from the Environment Agency to put these beds in? And thirdly, is there demand for more growers?
Yes, there is demand for more growers. We're desperately trying to find another 6 hectares for next year, and we want to expand because the demand of watercress is increasing. We're sold out every week currently, and George will vouch for that. Secondly, the Environment Agency are very tricky to work with to get permits. You need a permit to obviously take the water, but you need a discharge permit as well. The discharge permits are getting easier on the basis that there's no inputs to really worry about, but it is a challenge. We are looking at trying to use watercress beds to take water from rivers to denutrify them. So that's probably the most novel outside of production solution.
You mentioned it on quite a large scale, what you're doing, and you just mentioned another 6 hectares. How small could you scale it down to and still make it economically?
Okay, yeah, so my vice chairman for the Watercress Association last year was Will Allam. I supply him in the winter. In the summer, he grows in the UK, and if he runs out, he comes to us and he buys more. He's doing like 40 boxes a week. So the Watercress Association hasn't got very many members. We've got more associate members than we have actual members, but the smallest one is 40 boxes a week, and we support him. And I have to keep all of the smaller growers going, and that is part of the job as the chairman of the association. Just because we're big, we can help them, and we have to encourage them to do whatever they can. And the more smaller beds, the better.